So we have a cabinet of seabirds that are really hard to see in Connecticut typically. Some of these were officially accepted to the Connecticut Birds list only recently. If you maybe, Chris, zoom in on the sooty shearwater. This species was officially added in 2004, but has been here since 1972 because some sightings that were maybe not documented to the rigor of the future Rare Birds Committee, it was already known to occur in the state. But this is a moving target. Showing all birds of Connecticut is a challenge because as we learn more and keep going to the field, new species are being discovered. So right now the state list is at 450 or so species. Back then, in 1972, there were maybe 350 known. So at that time, this was already a quite complete representation. And we have added certain species over the years, and in some cases added models. So at this point, we have here about 550 real birds, Parsons specimens mostly. And we also have about 100 models, adding an additional 100 or so species. And here you can actually see that this is not your kind of cookie cutter exhibit. Parsons prepared these birds in various lifelike poses, and this reflects his knowledge of these birds' biology. Let me actually switch to your side here, Chris. So here I just wanted to show you some details of these cormorants. First, Parsons' talent and attention to detail can be seen very well in this immature great cormorant. You can see every feather perfectly arranged. And in this case, the bird is in the wing open, the wing drying pose. So this is actually showing some biology of these birds. We now know that cormorants and anhingas have very different feather structure, and their feathers actually are not waterproof, but absorb water. This helps them decrease buoyancy as they dive, so the diving is more effortless. But they do have the uropygial, the preen gland, and they can oil the plumage like ducks would. The other detail I wanted to maybe show you is the feet here on the gannet. You can actually see that all four toes are connected with the web. So this is so-called totipalmate webbing, all toes in Latin. And this is different from ducks that have only 3 toes connected with the web. And we have a team here at Yale in the Anjan Bular lab who are thinking of studying the developmental pathways in evolution of these webbing configurations. So let's now move to one of my favorite exhibits here. This is compositionally a marvel, the herons and an ibis. And here we have every single species represented, some of them in multiple plumages. We have here, for example, little blue heron, the adult on the top with breeding plumes. Below we have 2 immature birds, one on the right, complete juvenile, and on the left, a bird molting into its adult plumage. So this is called calico. Then below here, great blue herons. And again, every single bird is in a different species-specific pose. This, knowing the exact curvature of the neck here is definitely something that Parsons must have had to do it right. And if you actually maybe swing to the left to the great egret, here you can see that also the soft part colors, the bare skin and iris and bill color are all correctly rendered. This was actually retouched by Michael Anderson, our preparator, recently to make this fresh looking. But these are the colors that these birds would have during their breeding season, very short period, and then they would lose it. The bill becomes a little bit paler yellow, and the green disappears. And the plumes, these filamentous plumes here. So here we have the advantage of this exhibit not having glass barrier anymore. We actually can come close to any of these. If we could climb, if we had a macro lens, we could show you that you can actually see things like pectinate combs on the toes of these herons. Herons and nigers, for some bizarre reason, have evolved these pectinate extensions of the middle toes claw, and they use it to apply their powder down or scratch parasites out. Here next door, we see great bittern, and this is again an attempt to show a bird as it would stand in the reeds with all these streaks, nicely camouflaging it in the reeds and making it virtually invisible, so bird will be motionless with the bill up. So that's again a great behavioral. And the eyes, you can see that kind of almost pointing it not to the sides, but pointing forward. This is also a correct rendition. And one thing that we can do today is to also show you that all these specimens have secretly hidden labels. So I'm not sure if we can show you this, but I can at least read this to you. So this yellow-crowned night heron was collected on May 24, 1974, so actually 2 years after the exhibit opened, in Milford, Connecticut by Dave Parsons. And it's a female with ovary enlarged. So that's why I mentioned these specimens are valuable to scientists.
While you're doing that, Kristof, I'm going to ask Nicole if she's gotten any questions for you just yet.
Yes, we actually have a couple of questions, Kristof. Miguel would like to know how many types of birds we have. So maybe you could say how many species of birds live in Connecticut, and maybe also you could share how many bird specimens we have, how many species of bird specimens we have in the collections. And then we also have another question who somebody would like to know a little bit more about the toes of the heron. They couldn't quite hear, so if you wanted to share a little bit about that.
Okay, so first about the number of species. So we, as I mentioned, the official number of bird species recognized in Connecticut as well documented is at about 450. And we have virtually all these species represented in our scientific collection. So you can, as you probably know, we are here at the tip of the iceberg. We have about 153,000 specimens in our scientific collection and about 20,000+ of birds from Connecticut, which makes it the largest collection of Connecticut birds. Only the University of Connecticut has comparable set of birds from Connecticut. The second question, I just wanted to point out, and this is not very easy to show with a phone, that herons have their middle toe equipped with a little, the claw of the middle toe, unfortunately it's on the other side there, would have a little flange with a comb-like extensions, little flaps. So that's something that you may want to see if you come to our scientific collection at some point. So I wanted to move us on and maybe now go to see the duck. So here again, one of those very airy exhibits. We have ducks walking, swimming, preening. Here is a female pintail with stretching her wings. We have birds in display postures, and maybe later when we swing to the left, the merganser is preening her feathers there. So here again, there was an attempt to show all the species of ducks known to occur in Connecticut. Some of these were available right away, and some, as you can still see, are missing today. So for example, the black scoter, we have here a male, but we're missing a female. And here in the king eider, we have the female, and actually I checked, this is a specimen from Connecticut, but we're missing a male. And this bird here is kind of shown as it feeds, perhaps. So in this case, this is the challenge, that at some point maybe there was a very strict rule that exhibit have to be from Connecticut, but later it was relaxed, and now we have certain additions here that are from outside the state. So I know, for example, that the cinnamon teal came later, and it's from the Western US. But something even as rare as this European widgeon is from Connecticut. This specimen was collected by Parsons. here also you can see certain details that you would not be able to easily appreciate in the field. And one thing that birders often wonder about is the ring-necked duck. What is the deal with the ring neck? So in the field, typically you see this bird, it's just black and white, the male, and you actually see the ring on the bill. But here you can actually maybe tell that there is a chestnut color on this male. Here purposely, the neck was a little extended perhaps, and you can really see, well, at least we can see well, that there is a chestnut color. So this is again the advantage of seeing these specimens, these birds in 3 dimensions and with the size relative to each other, and sometimes nestlings in addition. So really a great opportunity.
Great.
Is there a question?
Yes, we have a question from Donna, Kristof. She's observed that years ago you could see swans swimming in the Long Island Sound, and she wonders where they've gone if they're not there now.
Well, I know that they have not disappeared. It's really, we can actually even show you here. So we have 3 species of swans possible to see in Connecticut. One of them is the resident year-round, the mute swan, and you can see it here. These swans are definitely still possible to see in Long Island Sound. I think it's just a matter of time, Donna, that you can see them again. I don't think they declined. They are in quite good shape, maybe to the detriment of other birds. And some other species like tundra swan and trumpeter are only vagrant, quite rare in Connecticut. We will not cover the dodo today, but we jumped into the raptors. And here you can actually right away see that we have only 1 vulture. Those of you who are birders here in Connecticut over the years have seen the increase in the number of vultures, black vultures, the second species, without the red head and this turkey-like bare skin. It has black, dark bare skin. And those birds were only documented to breed in the States about 20 years ago, so quite recently. And now if you go to places like East Rock Park, you can actually see them almost equally as frequently as the turkey vulture. And here in this case, I wanted to point out how beautifully you can study accipiters, these 3 hawks that can be seen in Connecticut and that are kind of 3 different size categories. And here you can see that the smallest, the sharp-shinned on the right, has also a kind of squarish tail, then the Cooper's intermediate, but there is certain overlap because in all raptors, females are larger. So this female of sharp-shinned is close in size to male of Cooper's. And then again, female Cooper's close to the male of goshawk. So these are the challenges we sometimes face. Chris, maybe if you can show the immature goshawk from the back. You can also study here in great detail the tail barring. So goshawk can be identified when you see one perched or flying sometimes by these jagged bars on the tail. They are not your even bars as in the Cooper's hawk or Sharpie. If we maybe look at that Sharpie there, it shows very even bars. So here again, this is why having these birds from close range and real specimens helps if you want to learn to identify them. Here you can also see how gigantic the eagles are. So we have the bald eagle and golden eagle, and they really tower. They are so much larger than things like red-tailed hawk that you would have here. So you can see why it's kind of unlikely to confuse them in the field if you know how much larger they should be. And here again, if you look at the harriers, the female is shown with the head facing the viewer. And if you look closely, you can see that it has this outline of the face, kind of like in an owl's. It's really a facial disc with some stiffened feathers passing right over the ears. And this is because, same as owls, harriers use hearing quite a bit when they hunt. They can apparently even pounce on some vole in the nest that is not really visible, but the bird can just hear it. And then if you go to the left, we have a full set of falcons. So peregrine falcons, as you know, they suffered quite a bit because of the egg thinning resulting from DDT overuse. And actually the DDT happened to be outlawed in the year when this exhibit opened. And at that time, peregrines were totally gone from the state. They were extirpated and no longer breeding. It took until 1990s for them to return to breed in first Hartford. And now we even had a pair of them nesting on Klein Tower at Yale. And we hope that they will continue. So these birds are no longer endangered and doing quite well. Then we have a gerfalcon and kestrels. Kestrels are not doing so well in the state because presumably they need much more open habitat, and we are losing this kind of habitat. So now there are some efforts to restore meadows, grasslands, power line cuts, and fields, and bring these birds back with also supplying them with some nest boxes. Is there maybe a question?
I have one, but I'd like Nicole to send one out too. I know that they've done a lot of studies lately on the closest relatives of these falcons. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, this shows the challenge that museums have with displaying any organism, because as we learn more, we often learn that the relationships that we thought were close are in fact a result of convergence. And in this case, we now know from recent genetic studies that falcons are closer related to parrots and songbirds than they are to other raptors. So this implies that they have evolved this raptorial morphology, the claw, the talons, the bills, as a result of convergence. So this means that if you wanted to, as museums often do, to show a linear sequence that reflects these phylogenetic relationships, you actually have a moving target. You have to keep changing. And here, if we wanted to in the future add monk parakeet, we would actually now need to put it with the falcons and close to passerines, to perching birds, and away from other raptors.
Huh. Nicole, do we have any questions from folks?
Yes, we have two great questions that I think connects to what you were saying about these falcons, Kristof. So we have one person who is wondering how many of the birds in the exhibit are still extant or alive in the world, and how many are extinct or endangered?
Great question. So I don't know if I can put the exact number. I suspect that of birds of Connecticut, it may be something like 10 species. So some of them are extinct in the entire world. So things like Labrador duck or passenger pigeon, and those we actually, Michael Anderson, in making the models, he actually did make models for all these extinct birds that are known to occur in Connecticut. And we have them, but we will not be able to exhibit them at this point, maybe in the future exhibits. And there are also some species that went extinct in the state of Connecticut, but are still doing fine elsewhere. And maybe this actually we can use to transition to the next exhibit here, the sparrows and finches. So I wanted to show you this single bird there. Chris can zoom on it. This is a Henslow sparrow. This is a species that used to nest in Connecticut in Litchfield County. We actually have specimens from Louis Bishop collection, eggs and nests from early 1900s in Litchfield. And then with the decrease of farming and open habitats, prairie-like habitats that Henslow sparrows require, these birds totally disappeared in not only Connecticut, but the whole eastern US, New England. So this is an example of something that is extirpated and no longer here. Maybe it would return if certain habitats were brought back. Second question?
Yes, so we have somebody in our audience who's wondering about feeding wild birds, particularly in the winter. They imagine that they must get accustomed to receiving food, particularly when it's scarcer. If people leave food for birds in cold weather, are they then obliged to do so on a regular basis? How does that impact the bird's existence?
I think that it's okay. I would say that it doesn't really make you obligated, because at least when we live in a city, I think there are quite a few other options. So I think the birds are opportunistic enough and move enough that they could find alternative food. and we rarely have winters that are so severe as to make these birds die because of somebody forgetting to fill in their feeder. So let's maybe look at some more of these birds here. And one thing I wanted to show you here is that cardinal, the indigo bunting, rose-breasted grosbeak, and tanagers are in very different positions here. And this is something relating to what I mentioned earlier, to our understanding of the phylogenetic relationships. And we now know that these birds that I just mentioned are each other's close relatives, and they are now classified as family Cardinalidae. Here you can actually see that these tanagers are labeled as Traupidae, as true tanagers, but now we know that in fact they are cardinalids, they are relatives of cardinals, and not members of the South American and Central American Traupidae, which may mean that in the future you might find them renamed in your field guides, but I'm not sure. Nobody has acted on this, so maybe the name will still remain because of this historical legacy. Here also I wanted to point out, if we look at these juncos, at the time when this exhibit was developed, you can actually see that two species were recognized in Connecticut. So there is a slate-colored junco. This is the common breeder in the northern half of the state and winter visitor at feeders. But also in winter, occasionally you can see the second species from the western North America called Oregon junco. And this again shows you how back then these were two species, and in fact, at that time there were 5 species of juncos known. Later they were all lumped into one species called dark-eyed junco. And we'll see if this, maybe this with more study will be revisited as with some other birds it happened. And maybe also here, similar situation, those of you who are sparrow experts occasionally can find in winter this pale version of savanna sparrow at the bottom there called Ipswich sparrow. This at that time when the exhibit was developed was considered a separate species. Now we know that it's a subspecies, just a large, pale, more kind of regional variant of the savanna sparrow. So again, this is the challenge of preparing these sort of exhibits, that you have to keep updating them, and it's very quickly become outdated.
Do we have another question?
We do. We have a couple of questions, actually. Dorothy would like to know if the bullfinch is only a European species. She thought she saw one in this display.
Maybe it's the pine grosbeak that looks a little bit like a bullfinch. So yeah, I'm a person from Europe, so I have seen bullfinches. This is a common bird that feeders in Europe. But here, the closest we get to that is this big finch called pine grosbeak. And despite the fact that they are grosbeak and they have big beaks, they are not related to rose-breasted grosbeak, which is a cardinalid. And the pine grosbeak is a relative of something like a house finch, purple finch, or evening grosbeak, the true finch.
We have one more question, if I may. Alexander would like to know if there are any hybrids in this exhibit.
Yes. Yeah, I should have pointed out when we were going through the ducks that we have a great exhibit showing the black duck and mallard and their hybrids. This is a bit of a problem sometimes, both for identification and for the species of the black duck. Here around the corner, I believe we have an exhibit on hybridization. This is something that you also can see today. The golden wing and blue wing warbler readily hybridized. And it's interesting that the blue wings, there is kind of asymmetric gene flow, and they were losing golden wings and blue wings take over. So here we have all possible parental types, the Brewsters, F1 hybrids, and Lawrences. This is the best example here of hybridization. And I also wanted to point out, before we leave this, I don't know if you can zoom in at the crossbills. So crossbills are those northern eruptive finches that show up in Connecticut in some years in large numbers. few years ago, they were easy to see in Hamon acid, for example, feeding on pine cones. And here you actually can see easily the crossed bills that give them the name. That's something, and you can actually tell that the upper bird of the red crossbill has the lower mandible turned left, and the lower two have it to the right. So this shows that they have handedness, and some people studied it, and it's about 50-50 bird, the bill turned to the left or to the right. So that's kind of an interesting little trivia. Now let's quickly go to my favorite birds in Connecticut, the wood warblers. So here we have a full set. I mean, technically we are missing things like black-throated gray warbler that shows up in some rare occasions from the West, but still, it's a very complete set. And some missing plumages were filled in with models by Michael. In fact, if you actually wanted to study these birds, the way we usually see them is high up in trees and from underneath. So you would probably need to lie down here to see this from the right perspective. But having the opportunity of seeing them from above, I just wanted to show Chris, maybe if you can zoom in on the Blackburnian warbler's head. How many of you have seen Blackburnian from above to actually see this yellow patch on the top of its crown? This is actually what this exhibit allows you to see, that it has not just the brilliantly orange throat, but also this nice coronal stripe of golden yellow. And the same, you can actually see super well that the yellow ramped warblers have their yellow ramps and yellow crowns. That's the Latin name, coronata, from that crown. And if you swing here to the right, Chris, we even have the yellow-breasted chat. So many of you remember that this used to be in field guides shown with the warblers and considered a warbler, although always considered an aberrant warbler. And now with more detailed genomic studies, we know that this bird is actually closer related to things like orioles and icterids family, the blackbirds. So this shouldn't be on this side, but should be now moved to the other side to be correct. And then here again, if you look at the neighboring exhibit, Parsons and the designers of the exhibit put the kinglets very low, so you can actually see their golden or ruby crowns, and the fact that ruby crowned female does not have the colored crown. And the nuthatches are in their head down poses, and blue jays is one of the best, very successful mount. The pose is just right on the money. Parsons again here wins. And if you go to the right here in the corvids, you have a nice comparison of the common crow, as at that time it was called, now American crow, and the fish crow, very common bird here in Connecticut. And you can actually here see the length and the thickness of the tarsi of the legs. It's very different. So this is, again, very good way to try to kind of learn how different they are, and the bills as well. And then try to see this in the field, especially when you see both species walking next to each other. But still very hard to do it when they're alone.
Do we have any more questions, Nicole?
Sure, we have several questions. One is about climate change. So Joss would like to know, how has climate change and resulting species extinction affected the species that are present in Connecticut in general? He noted that you mentioned that the number of species has increased since the 70s. So he wonders if the conservation activity is having a greater positive impact than the negative effects of climate change. Can you comment on these and other competing influences on species and population sizes in CT?
Yeah, so first of all, one little clarification. When I said that the number of species in the state increased, I actually meant that more birders went out and more species were documented and accepted. So now we have 450 species and not the 350 that were back in the 70s and known to occur. So this is not really increase, this is just increase of the knowledge of the birds, and detectability is now a little easier with so many more people going to the field. And global climate change definitely affects birds of Connecticut, and we even had a student here who used the collection and measured the birds, and as predicted by by the warming, I mean, I have to actually precede this by saying that there is one of the eco-geographic rules called Bergmann's rule that predicts that the animals would get bigger to cope with the cold, and kind of the surface volume ratio is more favorable when you are big in the cold to preserve your heat. And so you predict birds that are in warmer climates being smaller. And if you warm the climate, the birds should get smaller. And exactly with this prediction, some birds in Connecticut over the 150 years that we studied decline in their, slightly decrease in their size. And this is maybe a result of them moving from the south further north, or them just getting selected to be smaller when it's not needed to be big. So that's one little side part here. And I would say that ranges and the occurrence of species is constantly changing. We have certain species going north, cardinals expanding, red-bellied woodpeckers expanding, turkey, the black vulture I mentioned earlier started showing up in the state. So yeah, this is all result of, or could be result of the warming.
Thanks, Kristof. We have one more question I'd like to ask now. Nadia would like to know, where do goldfinches go in the winter?
So goldfinch are an example of those finches that are a bit eruptive and they move around, but they are quite cold hardy and can easily survive winters here. So many of the birds we see here in winter, I think, are local residents or maybe just moved from a little bit farther north. But that's not really a major migratory bird. It's pretty much a resident in the state. So now let's go on to a totally different habitat and look at this scene overall. Doesn't this look like you were somewhere at Milford Point or Sandy Point, and a bunch of shorebirds feeding on the ground, and then some egrets flying, sorry, some gulls and terns flying overhead. This is, again, an example of a beautiful demonstration of kind of niche partitioning in these coastal birds, especially on migration. You have birds with different length of legs, different bill shapes and sizes. And so here, if you sweep from the right, we have the curlews, whimbrel, godwits, and then come to a willet. And again, here comparison shows this bird preening and nicely showing the diagnostic wing bar. You have the short-billed plovers on the top, and to the right, an oyster catcher. From a certain angle, maybe you can see that the oyster catcher's bill is flattened laterally and very pointed, very sharp. This is what the bird uses to stab the muscle of open bivalves, things like mussels. And then the mollusk cannot close the shell and the bird can eat it. Killdeer shown with characteristic open bill and the pose that maybe implies that it's kind of distracting from the chick next to it. And then maybe let's go to the sandpipers here, maybe sanderling. Not sure how many of you know that the only shorebird in the world that has 3 toes rather than 4 is sanderling. And in the past, as evidence shown here, it used to be in its own genus, Crossetia. So sanderlings, 3 toes only. If you swing to the left to the purple sandpiper, you can see that maybe you can see that it has a 4th toe kind of hanging up above the ground. Maybe even easier to see in the phalaropes above. Maybe let's look at Wilson's phalarope there. So on phalaropes, you can see the 4th toe. If we were able to get closer, you would actually see that they have lobe toes, that 3 toes have little lobes like on a coot. That's why in one of the species in Latin is called Fulicarius, after Fulica, coot. And another one in Latin called Lobipes, in the past Lobipes, now Phalaropus lobatus, again from the lobes. So thanks to those lobed feet, they can actually spin circles and feed on the water surface, and basically are a little bit more efficient swimmers than the rest of closely related shorebirds. Then if you go further here, you see our complete set of gulls, and most plumage is represented. These are challenging birds to identify, so really having them put together like this makes it a little easier. So kittiwakes there, and if you zoom to the right, you have nicely contrasting the smallest gull, the little gull, on the top with its dark underwing, and below the largest gull in the world, the great black back. And that's a massive bird. And in their immature plumages, like this bird here to the left, you can actually still see how much more massive the bill is than the herring gull, for example, that is to the left and low there. And now maybe just a quick look at the last family of charadriforms, the alcids. So here you have murres, guillemots, puffins, and dovekie, and a razorbill here. One thing that you might be able to see that, except for the razorbill, most of these birds have a model added. And the models in this case are most relevant because usually when we see these birds in Connecticut, they are in winter, so they are not in their breeding plumages. But at that time when the exhibit was developed, the only available plumages were breeding birds from farther north. So that's why we have these beautiful breeders shown here. And for the puffin, I can point out that we looked at their labels. So the adult bird with this beautiful colorful bill is actually from Newfoundland, but our baby, the immature there, was salvaged, found dead in Connecticut. So that's actually, I believe, the only record, the only specimen record from Connecticut of the puffin. And maybe a question at this point? And
sure, we do have a question from Elizabeth about the missing fourth toe or highly placed fourth toe. She wants to know if that's a more ancient lineage than the perching birds.
Oh, no. Yeah, so perching birds are not really close related, so you cannot really compare in this case. And it's this is just a loss, evolutionary loss. So if you look at the tree of these sandpipers, their phylogenetic relationships, you'll see that this bird is embedded among the four-toed birds. So this is just a singular case where, because maybe of some developmental control issue, it just doesn't develop this hind toe. So that's the reason. We
actually have another question about legs. Laura would like to know why crow's legs look thicker than so many other bird legs.
That may be a question of taste, because I don't know. To me, they don't look that much thicker. It's kind of proportional, I would say, to the size of the bird. If you swing to the left and show the blue jay, I think it's, if you adjust to size, it's similarly thick legs.
While you're in the corvid section, we have a question from Elizabeth who'd like to know why she didn't see any ravens in the exhibit. Are they not common in Connecticut?
Oh, that's a great question. So at the time when the exhibit was developed, this was a super rare bird. Unfortunately, it returned, and now it's one of the most common breeders, but we simply did not have a specimen to add and room here in this particular exhibit. But yes, that's a great example of something that came back.
Can you give us the different calls between a crow and a raven?
So, so yeah, the ravens are much lower. I don't know, something like that.
Perfect.
But the American crow would be more like "Krah, ah," and a little happier. And the fish crow often doubled, very nasal. So yeah, this is actually what most birders use to identify these birds, because it's not always easy to tell the size, especially when you have a single bird.
For those watching, I do recommend more questions that make Kristof imitate the birds.
Great.
We have lots of great questions already, Chris.
Okay, sorry. It's my favorite one of Kristof's many talents.
Well, that is actually, I guess, a talent of many birders, and that's kind of a necessity when you go out, because you really mostly hear the birds, not really see as many as you hear.
Speaking of hard ones to see.
Yeah, so here is the owls, and again, a full set. The smallest, the sowet, the largest, the great horn,
So let's see what so this.
So here's a soet. So this is mostly winter visitor, and also shows up on migration. But there are some reliable spots for, where you can see them roosting in like Christmas tree farms and so on. So that's a more boreal bird. The rarest and closely related is the boreal owl. So this is the hardest owl to see in Connecticut. And then of the common ones, you have the great horned. And then swing up to the top for the screech. And here we have two color morphs. And if you look at the name, it actually just says screech owl. Now we know that there are two screech owls in this complex, and they are vocally different. So this is Eastern screech owl, and just don't make me imitate now. But the Western is a different call and different species now. And to the right, barred owl. So this is, again, because we've so beautifully reforested in the state, this bird is now quite common. Then the central snowy owl. Now we know that this is actually a species closely related to things like great horned owl. Despite the fact that they lost their ear tufts, they're actually just bubo genus owls, and they do show up regularly in Connecticut. And then you can actually compare here nicely the long-eared owls' ear tufts. And then maybe if you can go up, Chris, to the short ear. Here in this exhibit, you can a little bit see how they have also ear tufts, kind of more horizontal, but short-eared owl is also tufted. And finally, barn owl in its own family, and quite different in the way its facial disc is arranged, and here I guess it's shown in the like a defensive pose. This is when you would open a barn and an adult would be sitting next to a bunch of chicks or eggs, and they would start clapping the bill and hissing, and their calls are also extremely eerie. And this bird has declined in the state. Now it's considered endangered in the state of Connecticut. But luckily it's doing okay in some further states in the middle of the continent and the West. So maybe it's just a function of restoring more farming or open habitats. But I think at this point, maybe
do we have any
last questions, because we're finishing our circle here.
Yes. Any final questions, Nicole?
We've got a lot of great questions, including, thanks to Chris, if you could, Kristof, imitate a gull and a barred owl. There have been requests for that. I think if you
a barred owl?
A barred owl, yes.
Okay.
If you feel the need to decline, I think that would be acceptable. But
let me give it a try. Oh, 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 oh. So that's the who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? That's the mnemonic everybody in the state uses to identify barred owls.
Thank you for indulging us, Kristof.
That we should have added some way of hearing the vocalizations as you go to this exhibit, maybe in the future.
I'd also like to pose a question that a number of people have asked about collecting. So how does it get determined which birds get collected? Are there concerns about endangered birds being collected? And then what is the processing of the bird and the positioning of it into these great positions in the exhibit? How does that work?
Okay, so first about collecting. So obviously it's a highly regulated endeavor, and we follow the law. We actually, in the state of Connecticut, don't do any active collecting, but we do salvage. So any birds that die at windows, buildings, roads, and from people's cats, we accept here and prepare them. So this is the main mode of getting them today. At the time when this exhibit was being prepared, David Parsons at the museum was permitted to go out and collect, shoot some of the species. And we still do this when we do some of the international collecting in places where no specimens exist or certain kinds of specimens don't exist. But nobody these days goes after endangered and threatened species. So those usually are studied in some other means, and we definitely don't want to be contributing to any declines.
So I think a final question, echoes one from the beginning when you did your intro. What do bird lovers who are watching have to look forward to in the renovated Peabody Museum?
So one thing that we've done is pick the most charismatic specimens here, and actually have to mention here Flo McBride, who went through this exhibit very carefully and photographed and prepared a couple books on this exhibit, and she picked some of the really nice preparations of Parsons. I agreed with most of her choices, and those specimens will form the future Connecticut biodiversity exhibit in the new renovated museum on the same floor, in fact, almost in the same area here. And the other several species that are kind of phylogenetically interesting, or some interesting morphologies like the skimmer, I remember, or the beautiful pileated woodpecker behind me. Those will end up in the cornucopia of life. This is another exhibit that we're planning. So I think that our developers here, the exhibit developers, have a fantastic plan here, and many of the birds from Connecticut will still shine and be included in this, and the remaining will be studied, because now we have them, we'll have them accessible without a glass barrier, and they will be with data served through the online database. So this is, I think, still good future for them.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Kristof. We really appreciate this last trip through the bird hall. We will, I'm going to grant you your leave. Thank you very much, sir. And I'm going to turn this around.
Questions.
Turn this around real quick.
Moderating, Nicole.
Oh, you're welcome.
So we'll close this out the way we started it. Thank you for joining us. It was our privilege and pleasure to walk you through the bird hall one more time before everything gets deinstalled. Please do keep in touch with us. Sign up for our email list. Follow us on social media. As the project, the building project really kicks off this fall, we're going to be doing a lot of updates on our Peabody Evolved website, and also sending out regular updates via social media. So keep in touch. Please do send us your feedback. I believe you were provided with my email address in your registration form. So if you have any thoughts, questions that didn't get answered, by all means, send them to me, and I'll make sure Kristof answers them.
Chris, where can the recording of this tour be found?
Great question, Nicole. Always good to end on a great question. We have recorded this. We're going to do a little bit of editing and maybe put some fancy titles on it, but we hope to have it up on our YouTube page next week when it is ready. Again, not to bring it back to social media again, but we'll be posting it on social media as well. So have a wonderful weekend. Thanks again for joining us, and see you soon.